All right, good evening, fellow protectors. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Greg LeBoff here with you. Got Dustin Dodery, Brad Vanderleit, and we're here as usual every Thursday. We try to go live, and again, the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast is all about kind of sharing the process that we have all been going through, each of us been going through for the last 25, 30 years. Why? Because we feel like it is our responsibility to be able to protect our family. And we want to do that with a professional level of skill. So that means that you have to train. And the training has to be physically, mental, emotional, have to understand the legal, the whole deal. And so we are just trying to share aspects of this journey that we've been on for the past 3 decades. So if you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you've been with us before, we appreciate it, and welcome back. And we're going to kind of dive into tonight's episode. So tonight I labeled Cold as Ice. It's a really deep topic, and so I hope that people will stick with us and get the value out of it, because there is a lot to this. I'll just do a little bit of a setup before we cut to the intro. But the concept to me is this: when you find yourself in a violent altercation, you have men that melt, and then you got men that it's like ice water's running through their veins. Obviously, a violent altercation or violent assault, they can obviously, there's a range, but what we tend to deal with is when you are reasonably facing imminent grievous bodily harm or death. So you are playing high stakes poker, right? It is not only potentially your life, but even a higher pressure situation, the life of your family, the life of your loved ones depends on the outcome of what happens in this situation, and more specifically, how you handle this situation. That's a lot of pressure. That's intense. And so I want to break down tonight what are some of the defining factors that make the difference. Because is it just some people are born this way and they just, everybody boils at a different temperature. But, these guys that have this ice in their veins, they stay calm under pressure, all of this stuff, is that just they're more masculine, they're more men, more manly than other guys? Or what are the things that contribute to this? Can this be trained? Can you develop this? So I want to go into this topic tonight, and I want to do a deep dive on it, because I'll share my beliefs on that, and I'll get the other guys will share their beliefs, and we'll kind of go from there. But I really genuinely hope you stick with us. This is a very, very powerful episode. I'll just, before we cut to the intro, one of our most powerful and deeply held beliefs is that if you regulate yourself, you win, and if you don't, you lose. And that's as fundamental as gravity. If you can regulate your response, you win, and if you can't, you lose. Stick with us. We're going to unpack this and hopefully share with you some really valuable insights for how you can regulate and win. All right, stick with us, everybody. My 2 daughters. Well, I'm tired of screaming at the TV, and enough is enough. Throughout history, there have always been men willing to answer the call to the threats against our way of life. Well, today, that threat is right outside our doors, on our streets, in our neighborhoods, on our public transportation system, outside the places we work, and even outside of our children's schools. My new mission is to create and train a group of men that believe in the right to life and value the freedom a man has to. So we're back. We're going to dive into this. This is called Cold as Ice. And the setup before we cut to the intro is pretty simple, but it was really just talking about what happens in a high pressure situation. Why is it that some people lose control? They fail to regulate. And this is a good point here or good moment here where we talk about, I've seen guys, known guys, met people throughout 30 years of doing this that have a tremendous attributes. They are just, for lack of a better term, physical specimens, right? They're talented. They even have a great work ethic to go with that talent. But I've also seen them in just even moderate situations, in some form of a crisis situation where there is, a stimulus, and I have seen them underperform. And then I've seen guys that when you look at them, they don't have the same level of skill set. it's not that they don't have any attributes, obviously, but it's like they're just not the ones you look at and go, these are our most talented crew. These are the guys. And yet I've seen them handle pressure and stress and anxiety and fear at just an unprecedented level, like again, to where it's almost shocking. So, tonight, the cold as ice is, I think we can set up for everybody that the goal is in a high pressure situation, a life and death situation, you have ice running through your veins. That does not mean that you are devoid of emotion. I think that's probably the most important thing that I would want to start off with is that I remember being young, I was, the victim of an attempted murder, violently assaulted. In no way, shape, or form did I have any skill sets as to where I could defend myself. Completely and utterly broken. But the point I'm getting at is that you really don't understand how vital it is to being able to regulate your response. Because I had different skill sets, martial arts, all this type of combat sports, but it was all inaccessible because of this loss of emotional control, mental control, and so I absolutely believe that this can be trained. Because to just put things bluntly, I didn't possess the skill sets to regulate myself, and yet now, and having had other experiences over the 30 years, I do have those. I built those skill sets. I built that ability, and so I'm a believer in it. But yeah, it is just imperative, and it's important to understand that. I don't know. It has nothing to do with your capability alone. That's only one small factor. But I believe this stuff can be trained, and I believe that it is absolutely paramount for people to understand this part of the process. So I don't know, for you guys, just visceral thoughts on what we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, the one thing for me, like just when you very first said, some guys melt, other people have ice water running through their veins, without really knowing where you were going with that or with tonight's topic, like just the first thing that hit me was just like, yeah, like mindset, psychology. We have like we talk a lot about inner control box and maybe we'll unpack that all tonight, but like that's right where my head went to. I think when you really try to step back and put yourself into the context of a violent situation, I'm sure there's people out there where the first thing they think is like, what would I do? Like they go physical, like what would I do? Whereas my mindset, just from all the years of training, like it went straight to like, yeah, what's my head doing? what's my self-talk? How am I getting on top of regulating my response? Because if you can't do that, like nothing else matters, right? So my head went straight to it. What everything you just started talking about, that's exactly where I went.
Perfect, Brad.
Yeah, I totally agree. Um, you know, we talk about it all the time, like how big the mental, emotional, intellectual, spiritual side of training and development is. It's not just the physical. One thing that just I was just writing down like some thoughts, and one of the things that came to mind and is like warriors aren't born. They're not born warriors. They're trained, developed over time, day in, day out. Um, and it's just something that it's like, yes, there's that physical aspect, but it's like that's you have to train that mental fortitude, mental resilience, mental capabilities, because when you're in those moments, it's like if you never believe that that moment's ever going to happen to you, um, then yeah, you're probably going to melt because it's not even on your radar. Um, so yeah, there's a lot, again, like what Dustin said. There's a lot of different ways that obviously it's a very deep and vast kind of topic because there's a lot of parts within this subject matter. One of the things that I wrote down as well is like, well, belief systems. There's so much that we could really talk about that helps somebody have that capability, help somebody that um, to increase their level of conviction when faced with violent criminal assault. So there's lots here, I believe.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start unpacking some of this. So one of the thoughts, or one of the important points, I kind of didn't finish my thought at the beginning, so I'm just going to kind of circle back to that for a quick sec. But when we talk about being cold as ice and having that ability to regulate your response, I think it's real important for people to understand that it doesn't mean devoid of emotion. It doesn't mean that you're like, I think there's a paradigm out there where people think that the stereotypical man's man just doesn't feel the same way. They lack that, they lack empathy, and that's a characteristic of a sociopath. So most warriors, most of the guys that I've met, like, and I'm talking, when I say most, I mean the vast, 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 vast majority of these guys, they're the opposite of that. As a matter of fact, the more that they've come into contact and developed the violent side of their nature, there's an equal and powerful development of the compassionate side. They actually show higher levels of empathy. And maybe that's because a guy that's been to war and understands that, I mean, violence is about destruction. That's what violence is. Violence is destruction. Now you can destroy for the betterment of a situation, like you can destroy for, let's say, good, or you can destroy for evil. So it's like we always say, the tool of violence works for good guys and bad guys equally. Whether it's self-defense or murder, which are two very different things, good versus evil, that's determined after. But the tool of violence is about destruction. So yeah, I think it's just important that cold as ice, that ability to regulate and have that kind of ice water in your veins, doesn't mean that you don't have emotions. It doesn't mean that you lack empathy. It's the exact opposite. And that's kind of one of the points that we're going to bring out in this discussion. The ability to regulate yourself. And you guys, this will be maybe our first talk point. I personally believe that the ability to regulate yourself is diametrically opposed to suppression and repression of emotion, right? So if you're, and let me add this in there, we're going to talk, for the majority of this, there's three emotional states that I think cause people to lose control and fail to regulate: stress, anxiety, and fear. And I think that we need to start by kind of defining each of those, because although they have crossover and that one can feed the other, so you can definitely have stress, anxiety, and fear all manifesting at the same time, they are triggered by slightly different things. And I think a lot of people fail to understand that, and control follows awareness. So if we're actually trying to educate people and say, here's how you become more aware and gain more ability to regulate yourself, then you have to understand the triggers that would cause dysregulation. So I definitely believe that if you're going to learn to regulate, you cannot suppress and repress your emotions and all that type of stuff. You actually have to learn how to process those. Okay, so that would be my first thing. So would you guys first off agree with the idea that learning to control is not about, pushing everything out or pushing everything down and going, just fucking man up, drive on, suck it up, quit being a little fucking bitch, quit being a whiny little, whatever. Like, you got to just fucking toughen up, man. It is what it is. Fucking deal with it. Like that's not a recipe for success in regulation.
Yeah, it's very low potent fuel, if that makes sense. Like, it's like it might, you might well start a small fire with that, but it's not the elements that is going to create like high octane fuel, and for somebody who is trying to defend themselves. When it comes down to it, it's like there's motivating emotions, there's motivating elements of like love for family. For me, it's something I think about. It's like, well, why? Like, what's on the line? It's not my ego that's on the line. It could potentially be my daughter's father, who may not come home if I let emotions ramp up and get into my personal self as opposed to my professional self. And it's like, that doesn't, they're like, oh, just suck it up, don't be a pussy. Like, that's very low octane. It's like, so what fuels me to make sure that I'm tapping into my professional self, is not the ego thinking I'm a pussy. It's the what's on the line, who are the people standing behind me. I get way more fuel from that to have the mental fortitude to push through violence than just a fucking ego.
Yeah, well, I think, though, one of the things that I'd have to clarify for people listening to this is what you're talking about is one of the ways that you regulate is you're talking about the difference between the personal self and the professional self. And that's literally just maybe this is oversimplistic, but I'm just trying to communicate this concept very, very quickly. It's like you have two avatars, right? And so you say, listen, if I'm going to have to a law enforcement officer going to work every single day, it is very beneficial for them that the second they put on the uniform, that there is a transition that happens and they stop going from the personal self. So example, Greg LaBeouf, and the second the uniform comes on, you got to punch in, go to work and become Officer LaBeouf. Those need to be two different people because Greg LaBeouf is just human. And so you can have bad days and you can have relationship problems and you can have struggles with your kids and financial problems and pressures and burdens. And this is just all regular life stuff. This is nothing extraordinary, but you can't take that with you because you're going out to quote unquote protect and serve. So what Brad's talking about is developing a personal self and a professional self and having a switch so that you actually literally kind of in the moment of crisis where you may have to become, and this is why we often say, like, listen, you're your own first responder. And if you look at that and say, yeah, geez, for my family, I am the head of security. Like I am the entire security department. I am the first responder. Well, imagine going to work as a police officer with zero training. Imagine going onto the battlefield as a soldier with zero training. So you cannot, well, you can operate as a first responder for your family with zero training, zero skill set, zero knowledge, nothing but, the willingness and courage to do it. And yeah, you can argue that that's better than nothing, but marginally, you know what I mean? It's not, that's not what I want to do, You want some strategies, tactics, and tools to go with that. So absolutely the ability to regulate developing the personal versus professional would be absolutely an integral part of regulating that process, like being able to regulate your response. Dustin, I want you to give you a
Yeah,
chance.
well, to your last point there, it's kind of like how much risk do you want to take on? Like you said, it's marginal improvement to say,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? I've got the willingness, I'll do it. Okay, but you're still assuming a ton of risk
yeah,
with that kind of mindset. If that's all you have, right? So, and then going back to kind of answer your first question about, man up, suck it up, get out, just get in there, just do it. It's like, I mean, if today's lesson is like, trying to teach people how to actually stand up in the face of violence, I mean, as Brad touched on, it's like that's not really going to be a whole lot of motivation for somebody. You're not, if that's your lesson, like you're not going to get anyone to change their behavior to be able to actually deal with a serious violent situation. We did a whole podcast, I think, on the concept of like people will only do what they believe will work, and people will only do what they believe that they can actually do.
yeah,
And so it's like if you don't actually give them something, just that willingness to be like, well, I'll just stand up and go. It's like, yeah, but you don't know what to do. You don't necessarily believe it'll work. You don't believe you can do it.
You
You're
don't
not going
even
to get
want
very
to.
far. You're not going to be very effective. Sorry?
You don't even want to.
No, yeah, exactly. So to me, that whole like mantra, whatever you want to call it, of just like, oh, suck it up, get in there, man up. It's like, yeah, I mean that's 1%.
yeah.
So again, how much risk do you want to take on?
Well, I think too, like again, I want to get into defining stress, anxiety, and fear here, but we talked about suppression and repression is not a solution to things, right? So just that whole man up mindset and stuff. But the other side is that when you have somebody that has the willingness, just to clarify this, right? Because you want to be able to regulate, you want to operate cold as ice. So the problem is somebody that goes, yeah, I'm fucking willing. I have the willingness and I have the courage. Fuck them. They come to me. You wait and see. This is the greatest example. Either that's why I got a gun. They typically list the gun they have because that makes it more powerful to them. That's why I got myself, my Remington. That's why I got my, fucking Mossberg. That's why whatever it is. But they'll, you come to Mouse, see what happens. I got a shovel and a lot of land. Another great thing that people always say, you know what I mean? Shut up, shovel, and you know what I mean? Or shovel, shut up, and shoot, shovel, shut up, kind of concept. Is again, it's like what happens with that way of thinking is you are creating an expectation, you are creating a blueprint in your mind, and often it's a pedestal expectation, meaning that it's not grounded in reality because you, in fact, have no training, have no skill sets, you don't know the difference between a lethal threat and just violent, aggressive behavior. They're not the same. You have to, so you don't know your legal rights. You don't know what you would do. Like you have an idea of what you do. You have a fantasy of what you do. You're not grounded in any type of reality. And so what happens again is the second that something happens, the situation kicks off, you are regulated. You do feel calm. You do feel comfortable. You do feel certain. Those 24-inch biceps, you know what I mean? That you're like, nobody would fuck with me. Look at me. I'm a goddamn fucking beast. You have no look how much weight I jack, you know what I mean? Because again, size, I got tattoos and I shave my head and I got a big beard, like all the manly things are met, I'm a badass. Well, that's not grounded in anything. So that expectation, all of a sudden, you know, one of the definitions of fear, false expectations appearing real. You think you got it. Then all of a sudden, you get some feedback. And that feedback is pain. That feedback is failure. That feedback is an inability to relay damage onto somebody. It's an inability to move adequately, you know, you just don't understand anything, and now you're falling off the pedestal. I mean, we all can have expectations, and even as grounded in reality as you are, as disciplined and as trained as you are, as regulated as you are, expectations don't always get met. You know, plans don't always survive contact with the enemy. Almost, you know what I mean? And so all of a sudden, you can suffer damage, you can take losses, you can do all these things, but when you're closer to the ground, the fall tends to kill you less. But when you have a pedestal expectation, you know what I mean? So there is another side of this where somebody does feel regulated, they do feel calm, but it's a false sense of security that bolsters them. So it's a false expectation that to them just appears real. And then all of a sudden it's like, you know, I know guys, you know guys that are hunters. We all know guys that are hunters. And if you talk to hunters and they go out, when they have encounters in the woods with bears like grizzlies, and you've had even just witnessing them from afar, but watching them, if you've ever had the experience of watching them run or move or, you know, posture or climb a tree or whatever it is, almost every single person goes, holy fuck, it's different and real than you ever thought. There's people that think they can fight a bear. Like there's people that think, wow, I mean, bear, I could outrun that thing, or I'd climb the tree, or I'd just move around a tree, whatever. They have no idea the agility, power, speed, determination of a bear that gets locked into midbrain and goes, fuck you. You know what I mean? A mother bear defending her cubs. People are just, so again, you have an expectation that all of a sudden you get hit with the reality, and the reality is insurmountable. You will lose regulation. So a false expectation sets you up for a bigger fall. Okay, you know what I mean? So let's just real quick, let's go through the three things because this is, you know, central to the conversation tonight. But there's three kind of things that will dysregulate. So stress, or that will cause dysregulation. Stress, anxiety, and fear. I'm not saying these are the only things. There's variations of and combos of these things, but stress, anxiety, and fear. So let's define this. So what is stress? A base definition of stress is a response to a specific situation. So it is a physical, it is an emotional reaction to a specific situation. So all of a sudden, there's two guys, you know, outside my house. And they, you know, they bang on the door, and you kind of look out the window, or you got your security cam, and you see two guys who you don't recognize, who you can't instantaneously identify a purpose for them being there, and the tone of the knot, whatever it is. Now there's a situation. You're going to start to feel stress. Or you can start to, well, you will feel stress. To what level? So stress is typically a response to a specific situation. Now, anxiety is more a reaction to your internal thoughts or feelings about a situation. So obviously this can be connected. Those guys bang at your door. Well, this is a situation. You see, there's two guys. I don't know these guys. The way that they bang, you're going to feel stress. But you're also, remember, there's this powerful thing that our species has, and no other species on the planet has, to the best of our knowledge, and it's called metacognition. Meaning we have the ability to be aware of what we're aware of. Like what you're thinking of, you can be aware of that. So anxiety can come and tends to come not just from the situation, but from our feelings and thoughts and beliefs about the situation. So all of a sudden, the two guys bang on your door, you have a situation, concrete, tangible situation. Stress can appear from that. And I'm going to define stress even deeper in a few seconds. From that stress of that situation, you can start to manifest anxiety because you are instantaneously, remember, in combat, you have a physical, the human system is hit emotionally, so you feel it first, and those feelings become thoughts. And those feelings and thoughts impact your actions. So the second the situation happens, right, that causes stress, now we are aware of our feelings, and those become our thoughts, and now we are experiencing anxiety. Okay. And then the third one, fear, and I've already kind of put this out there a little bit, but fear can go one of two ways. So you can have a false expectation that appears real. Okay. And that is what most people tend to have because they don't tend to have direct experience with something. Okay. So, like, again, someone banging at their door and looking out and going, fuck, I don't know who these guys are, and automatically having a feeling that these guys are up to no good and this is trouble. So the intuition, the messenger of intuition kicks in. So all of a sudden you're having all of these different expectations, and those can drive dysregulation. So now all of a sudden your blood starts to boil or you start to melt, right? All these emotions just percolate over. So if we understand that one of the goals then to operate and be able to regulate, in kind of our analogy, cold as ice, is not that you're not going to feel and have emotional and psychological reactions or responses to things, but we have to regulate those things. Okay, so we have to make sure that, like, the opposite of fear, I'll start from the top down this time, you can have a false expectation that appears real, or you can face it, so you face everything, or face, explore, and rise is the best way that I like to redefine fear. You face something, you explore it, and typically that means you've done the work on the front end to explore interpersonal human aggression, to explore, the physiology and the psychology of conflict and combat and violence and all that stuff. You face it, explore it, and you will rise, because you will be able to regulate. So I also would say face, explore, and regulate, because those are it comes in that order: face something, explore something, and then regulate off it. And that's how powerful experience is for us, among other things in that. So if we circle back to stress, you can talk to people about stress and say a situation can cause you stress. And people say, yeah, no shit, man. You're talking about facing imminent grievous bodily harm or death. You're talking about people coming onto my property or people at my front door, banging at the door, and I got my family inside, and no shit, I'm going to feel stress. Okay, but let's break down, because there's stress and then there's what's called super stress. But what are the ingredients that have to be present for us to feel stress? And there's some very specific ingredients. And what has to happen is, whether it is real or perceived, you have to have a real or perceived gap between the demands of the situation and your capability to meet those demands. So there is a task or a job that is now looming. I have to maybe potentially defend myself and my family against multiple opponents. I see two guys out there. And then your perceived capabilities. Now I say real or perceived, because there's guys that we talked about this. There's guys that have tremendous skill sets. They have experience. These are guys that have fought, like they're pro fighters, they're this, that, whatever. But all of a sudden in this situation, they perceive that, oh fuck, this is bad. Like that guy's got a fucking machete. These guys might have guns. Oh, my family's here. Like, what if I fail? If they kill me, if they get past me, my family's dead. Like, there's all of these things. So you can have someone that has all the skill sets to manage the situation, but they don't see it that way. Self-doubt's a bitch. Stinking thinking is a real thing. So now the last part of that ingredient is, not only do you have a perceived or real, there's a perceived or real gap between the demands and your capability to meet it, but what really drives stress is that you are hyper aware that there are immediate and severe repercussions for failure to meet those demands. That escalates things to a different level. If you had people knocking and banging at your door, and as much fear and stress as you might feel, but if somebody could just, snap their fingers, freeze everything, and tell you, hey, listen, these guys are coming through that door, but they're only after you. If they get you, your family will be fine, but they're after you. So it's your life that hangs in the balance. That's stressful. If that person told you they're going to go through you, and the second they have you either neutralized or contained, they're going to do unspeakable, horrific things to your family. that is their true intent. You have two different types of stress in that situation right now. Do you get what I mean? Because all of a sudden, the demands of that situation change. So hopefully people are starting to see what type of stress that situation can percolate inside of you. You have to try to regulate that. Never mind all of the strategies, tactics, and tools and fighting skill. You got to regulate that shit. But you get where anxiety, let me ask you, between the two scenarios, which scenario do you think causes greater anxiety? Scenario one, where you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that all they want is you, but your family, win or lose, your family won't be harmed. Or scenario number two, where you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if they neutralize you or contain you, that they are going to do unspeakable and horrific things to your family. Well, let's look at anxiety. Anxiety is a reaction to your own internal thoughts and emotions. So the second that you know that's true about the family, or that's what you perceive to be true, believe to be true, what thoughts percolate up inside of you when you go, holy fuck? Because you're thinking about the evil, and you're thinking about, what if I fail? Like, that burden of responsibility becomes hyper real. You get what I mean? So go ahead.
It's almost like, when you look at those two scenarios, that when your family and the life of your family is on the line, no matter where you're at, is still a higher level of anxiety. Mm-hmm. Because like even if you're like, well, fuck you, you got to come through me first. Like, even if you have a strong mental fortitude, there's still a level of anxiety. Like, you're right, you can regulate it and control it, but it's still higher. Mm-hmm. Because if you die, then, or detained or whatever it is, then there's more on the line. So it's like it has that higher elements to it 100%, right? Because it's like, if it's just you, it's like, well, if I die, I do my best and not everything I can. It's like, yeah, but it's just me on the line, right?
Yep. Okay, so one of the things with this is, we're painting these scenarios. So how do you regulate? There are so many steps that we could put into place to teach people how you regulate yourself. And like I said, it is not about emotional suppression or repression. You cannot just in that moment go, fuck you, and drive through this shit. Let me correct this. It's not that you can't do that, but that is reactionary. That is the amateur way to do this. It's kind of like getting on the back of a thoroughbred racehorse when you have no idea how to ride a horse. That's not a horse a beginner should get on the back of. Now, that horse might take you around the track and you might hang on. But when that animal busts loose, I mean, it's one of these things, again, where people think, well, I could ride a horse. How fucking hard is it to ride a horse? Just fucking, sit on the saddle and hang on. There's a difference between riding an old fucking plow horse at your grandfather's farm and being on the back of a fucking thoroughbred racehorse. Like, you got to have some skill sets. Do you get what I mean? Emotions in a life and death situation are far more intense than what people think. This is not a bar fight. This is not, you know what I mean? Yeah, like, this is not, your general average day, everyday run-of-the-mill confrontation. This is a different league that you're going into. So you will most likely become dysregulated, and the stress, the anxiety, and the fear, your own internal emotions and your internal thoughts, those things are activated instantaneously. That's the human system. We feel it, we think it, we act it. And so most people, the training they get into is so physically centered. Because again, everyone's trying to teach people how to fight. So it's like everyone's so worried about, like, what's the best kick? What's the best punch? Show me the best, like, show me how to work the knife. Show me how to work they just want these tools and these physical things. But those skills, the physical, is literally inaccessible. Remember, we feel it. That means the emotions activate first. Those emotions become thoughts. Those impact the action. That's human physiology. It never goes the other way. It's never action first. The physical does not dictate the emotional and the mental. It doesn't. Now, when you train, there are tools and techniques. where you can physically do things to help regulate your mental and emotional. But the human system works feel it, think it, act it. That's the process. Okay? Just like you can feel something emotionally that's a negative, and you can have, if you have the training, you can psychologically start shifting the emotion. It's like it's a filter that you've built, and it starts to shift the emotion. So it's like, again, you got redundancies to stop the stinking thinking or the negative, dysregulation. But so if we just get stress, you have to have a perceived gap and immediate and severe repercussions. So how do you start to change this? How do we become less stressed when all of a sudden somebody's banging at our fucking door and we go, I don't know who these guys are, I don't know what they're doing here. This has the potentiality to become a very, very bad situation. Well, line familiarization. You have the training to say, okay, strategically, tactically, what am I doing? How do I start right away? There's always an objective. Bad guys always have an objective. The first response is not to fucking fight people. You know what I mean? That would, again, to me, is a sign of dysregulation. Sometimes an assault can happen in a blink of an eye, and now you need to be physically defending yourself, but you still had to regulate emotionally and psychologically before you act physically, and that's all happening in a blink of an eye. But in most situations, there is pre-contact. And that is where people become dysregulated. The vast majority of conflict and even violent assaults, there is pre-contact. There's pre-contact threat cues, there's pre-contact, and that's where the systems get fired up. And that is where most people become dysregulated. And so they lose before they've ever won, before they've ever even started. Sorry, Dustin, go ahead.
Just super quick. I was just gonna say that's where we always talk about don't get sucked into the story.
Yeah.
Don't get caught in all the interaction and all that other stuff. It's like you already have to be doing the work. Like you're saying, you're already starting to execute a game plan up here before anything physical ever happens.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of backstory thrown out which sucks people in.
How many times in our experience of running scenarios that we've had feedback from members coming through that they're like, oh, I was just so happy when it actually went physical.
Yeah.
Because it was like because then you're in it. And there's no, like, the pre-contact stuff that you're talking about and you're alluding to, Greg. They're like, well, that I'm done that because now I'm getting punched in the face and I have to do something. And it was like, well, I would rather prefer just make it blatantly obvious that you're attacking me, so I don't have to have these pre-conflict regulating. Because it was hard for people because I think that they were just like, oh, it was very clear when I knew that exactly what it was.
Yeah, well, the stressors deregulate you because, again, it's the system, the emotional. If somebody just attacks you, the human system still felt it first, it thought it second, and acted third, no matter how fast that process happens. The problem is when you have pre-contact and it doesn't go physical right off the bat, you have time to become aware. Metacognition bites you in the ass because you become aware of what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And you start going, holy fuck, this is stressful. Holy shit. Most people don't say, oh man, am I feeling anxious? But the anxiety amplifies the stress. You feel it, even if you don't know what to call it. But it's the stress and the anxiety starts to percolate. So one of the concepts, and I want to throw this out early because clearly as we go through this, there are so many different, like to just teach people how to build the personal versus professional, how to build out the dual avatars and how to use that mental and emotional armor of having a personal and professional self. That is, I do a 5-hour lecture on that just, barely teaches the foundation to people in 5 hours. So in the context of an hour-long podcast, there's no way we're going to be able to get into all the details of this. But I thought about this and wanted to talk about this because I just had one reoccurring thought that I want to share with people, and I want to explore that, so I want to get that out there right now. It's a concept that we talk about quite often, but one of the most important things is, so like I'm just going to use keep building on the example of stress. If you're training and you have line familiarization and you have experience, so you have been taught, and taught specifically the type of stress that you're going to be facing. So you've talked about what happens with home invasions, what happens with road rage, what happens with, X, Y, and Z. Then what happens is you are far less likely to see it, not only to see or feel, but to have a gap. Meaning, mission demands, you go, okay. Control follows awareness. Rationalized and accepted this. I've understood that this is a potential thing, and here it is. So right away, you're like, I've been aware of this. I'm in control of this, and ultimately, you have mission demands. Meaning, what am I doing? Step 1, step 2, step 3. You know different, fallback areas in your home. You've fortified your defenses. You have a plan. You have this, you that. Your family has a plan. All these things, right? So all of a sudden now, you don't feel like you're behind the 8 ball. You still have, there is always a realistic fear. There is always a realistic level of stress that comes with these situations. Again, this goes back to me saying, the goal is not to feel zero stress. That won't happen. The word we use with everything is realistic fear, healthy realistic fear, healthy reality, healthy grounded stress or grounded anxiety, mean grounded in reality. These things actually enhance performance. You need a certain amount of physiological, psychological arousal to get you into state, especially for combat. We don't want fine motor skill, we want high complex motor skill. So you actually need to get the fucking heart going. Like, you want the emotional system to activate, the psychological system to activate, but you need to have trained the feeling and the meaning that gets attached to it. Because what you focus on, what you become aware of, you're going to attach meaning to that. So what's the meaning you're attaching to that? Oh, fuck, I'm screwed. Oh, shit, there's 2 of them. Oh, fuck. Or it's like, okay, yeah, man, I knew this shit could happen. So it's like, there is, like, come what may. Come what may, doom on you. Like, we have the strategy, tactics, tools, so you start working the process. But the kind of thing for me off that is when you do all that, the thing that I find can creep in and steal, like even destroy good training, where you're like, I'm prepared, man. I'm not saying I'm fucking Superman. I'm just saying, fuck you, come what may, doom on you. Like, I have a plan. I understand your objectives, and I'm going to destroy your objectives. So, like, you're in the fight. Is all of a sudden future thinking. I think anxiety and even fear in terms of false expectations, future thinking, but anxiety at the root of this can really undermine warriors. And where I get that is even a guy that is well trained. Again, there's no guarantees in combat. The guys that actually train, they don't walk around with some sort of Superman complex. I've been around professional fighters. Professional fighters tend to have an ego, and justifiably. You have to believe that you're the champion long before you're ever champion. You genuinely have to believe that you are the best out there. To be a gladiator, to get into the ring and fight. You just genuinely have to do that. Now, the best fighters, they see themselves as champions, they have an ego, but the very best guys they have a humility with them. Okay, so I just wanted to get that out of the way. Most warriors, it's not an ego like that. It's like they trained, they're prepared, they believe, they feel sharp, they feel, deadly powerful, but they just understand the realities of combat and they've accepted that. So they're like, fuck it. You know what I mean? I'm going to go out this way. And if you're going to get me, this is one of the great sayings. If you're going to get me, it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever fucking done. That's a powerful saying. It's not like, fuck you, I'll kill you, I'm going to kick your ass. Just go, hey, you may get me. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. So if you punch in and go to work, you know what I mean? Like, whatever. Like, and that ties into this. What I believe inoculates you against anxiety is when you've been taught and processed through this concept. Divorce yourself from the result. It is such a powerful thing or process to go through. Because anxiety is, again, the stress, the guy's banging at the door. And right away, someone freezes time, tells me, if you go down, they're going to do unspeakable things to your family. When I just think about that, I can feel the anxiety inside me. Because now all of a sudden, it's put my focus on the result. Fuck if I lose. If I lose. Listen, I'm an entrepreneur by force, not by desire. Meaning, I have this as a mission for 30 years. I fucking do not want to be an entrepreneur, but this is a calling which has forced me to be an entrepreneur. You know what I mean? So I am. But what I'm getting at is when you can't be an entrepreneur, and I've learned this, even though I don't want to be an entrepreneur, but I am, you cannot worry about the risk. I remember from the day I started this, and I've been doing this 30 years, you are only successful when you don't worry about where the money's coming from 2 weeks from now. Do you get what I mean? As an entrepreneur, you go through ups and downs, and the first 10, 15 years, 20 years of this is not an easy thing to make a living at. You know, you go back even 7 years, 8 years, most Canadians didn't want to accept the reality that, you know, violence exists and that the police and the governments are not going to protect you. They didn't even understand that the police have no legal obligation to protect you, the individual. People just didn't understand that. So my point is this, though. What I learned is that I started to really get successful in this when you just let go of that. I divorced myself from the result. And every day you just wake up and do the work. And when I do the work, the result is inevitable. But you can't have fear. You can't have anxiety. You can't let your thoughts start going to the future and go, fuck, man, how am I going to make, payroll next month? How am I going to make rent next month? How am I going to, my kid, fuck, they're going to need braces. How am I, the second you start doing that shit, you become impotent. It takes all of your fucking power, and everything you fear actually comes to fruition. Combat is exactly like that, only it's all hyper accelerated because it's all going to happen in the span of a few seconds. And most people never get the fact that they're like, fuck you guys banging on my door, they're ready, but their brain, there's an anxiety that they're not even consciously aware because so much intense stimulus is surrounding them, but they are feeling and thinking about the result. What if I fail? What if I fail? Don't fail. Get ready, man. What if I'm not fast enough? What if I'm this? What if I'm that? All of that is tied to the fact that you are married to the result and you are focusing on the result. The result, good or bad, might only be 20 seconds in the future. In 20 seconds or less, this is going to be decided. And you have to get back in that fucking moment. And that moment, that second, is going to feel like 5 minutes. But you cannot allow your brain to go 19 seconds into the future because it'll compromise you. Does that make sense? And I know that we've done a lot of training and weekends and where we've worked this concept because there is a way to work this, to teach your mind to divorce yourself from the result because you have to control your focus. Your focus is a force multiplier, and nothing stands up to the power of focus. Whatever a human being puts their focus on, real, like 100% intent and focus, that shit gets solved. That's where they tap into a different level of power and commitment, and it supersedes even your attribute levels. You might not be the greatest athlete, but man, you're not the biggest, strongest, fastest. But when you have the ability to laser focus and operate free from the anxiety of a future result, even when that result literally is life or death for you and your family, that creates a different animal. So would you guys agree with how powerful I think that part of it is? And then maybe share some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you said something, Greg, that that it's sticking with me, and it's time to punch in and go to work, right? Because you're like, when you have that anxiety that could put you even in the future, 15, 20, 30 seconds, and then that could destroy you. And what I really liked about it, and I know we say it all the time, but it was again of like saying that result doesn't matter. You're divorcing yourself from that result because right now it's just time to go to work, right? Whatever that work happens to be for that moment, for what the stimulus is in front of you. And it's like, and if you we have these sayings, and we have a lot of them because they anchor things like that for us, right? They anchor the ability for us to say, hey, listen, like, yes, there is this a violent criminal assault in front of us when we're working through this process. And it's like, well, it's time to punch in and go to work. And what we know from years of experience is like, well, violence demands you to be in the moment. It demands you to be in the moment. So if you don't have the ability to regulate your response to that, and you get taken, that anxiety takes you into the future. And we know that violence demands that you can't be in the future. You need to be here right now, present, because the future, if your mind's in the future, like, that'll get you killed, right? So it's just some points that I wanted to kind of touch on from kind of like what you talked about, because it just really resonated with me, because that's time to punch in. Is like, it's a way to anchor quickly on what's attached. You attach a meaning to that, right? So yeah, I love it.
Dustin, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, similar in the sense that, like, obviously, I believe if you focus on the outcome of something, well, you have no control over it. Because, like, as Brad's alluding to, that's in the future. Well, you can't go ahead in time and have a direct impact on the future. So, as Brad is saying, is like you can only be in the moment. So, for me, it's like, you talked a lot about mission demands. Like, in a violent scenario, there's certain demands that situation requires you to meet. And then again, you talked about the perceived, is there a perceived or a real gap between that and your expectations of capability and all that? And it's like, so we always talk a lot about mission commands. And like for me, I come back to that all the time. For violence, for anything. It's like the second there's a problem, it's like, what are the mission demands? What needs to happen? This, and this. Okay, so what am I going to do? That, and that. And this kind of touches on exactly what Brad was just saying. It's like, do you have to be in the moment? And the way you stay in the moment is by addressing the mission demands, by assigning mission commands. Give yourself work to do. Like Brad said, punch in, go to work. Well, that's how you punch in and go to work. You have to have mission commands that you give yourself in that moment, and that deals with the demands, and you're not focused on the outcome. As you said, put the work in, the result's inevitable, as long as you're doing the work, right? So,
Yeah. I think the thing that, as we get probably closer to where we'll land the plane on this, but what has to happen before the demands and the commands, and you guys can add in your 2 cents on this, but this just became apparent to me this week with some of the new clients that we have that I've been training here. Before you ever can get to the mission demands and commands, because yes, that's the training part of it, right? But it doesn't matter. Here's the thing. If you train somebody and you say, you make them aware, okay, these guys are banging at your door. The demands are what? Is that going to be their primary entry point? What if that door gets kicked open? Do you know what I mean? Like you might be looking through a security camera. So right away you're going through the mission demands are there's 2 guys, but the mission commands start scanning. Do they have anything in their hands? Are their hands concealed? Do you know what I mean? So is there a weapon? Right away you're looking for, do they have a projectile? Is it a firearm? Do they have a machete? You're doing, if your camera or you have other cameras, you're instantaneously checking to see is there another vehicle? Can you see 360 degree on your home? Is there 2 or 3 other people now circling around to try to get at a rear entry point? Or is it if these guys kick the door open, they have support, now there's going to be 6 guys funneling through? Like, that's what we're meaning when we're talking about mission demands and mission commands. Your brain has to start going through almost like a checklist, like a pilot on his pre-flight checklist. You're busy doing the work of going, these are the demands, here's the commands, so that you're putting together a kill chain. You're putting together a tactical response. No training should ever teach you pre-packaged responses to things. That's why when people say, oh, I'll teach you what to do in a road rage, I'll teach you what to do in a home invasion. No, what you're going to do is you're going to teach people, you're going to give them the skill, the strategies, tactics to be able to develop a response plan in that moment, because every crisis is unique. Yes, there's some guidelines, all that type of stuff. But my point is this. Prior to that, what most people fail to go through, which is why they have a really hard time divorcing themselves from the result, is they never actually work the process of rationalization and acceptance. That supersedes or precedes mission demands and mission commands. And if you don't know what you're doing in training, or you have a coach that doesn't understand the value of that, or doesn't want to put the time and effort into that, then they're going to jump right to mission demands and mission commands. Just like you're going to have coaches that jump right past strategies and tactics and move to teaching people tools, because tools are tangible. Show someone a kick, a punch, a wrist lock, swing a stick. People love that shit. Oh, look what I learned how to do. They can show their friends and their wife and everybody's impressed. Okay? But rationalization and acceptance. If you have somebody, let me just go through an analogy, and I think that's pretty powerful. If you get told that you have a terminal illness, you're going to struggle at first to wrap your brain around that. Because as human beings, we all know one thing from just as our earliest knowledge as a human being. This journey ends in death. Nobody gets out of this game alive. Yet, we live the vast majority of our life believing somehow that we can cheat death. We don't just think that we can hold death off. Most people don't walk through life with death as an advisor. They just feel like, I'm going to live forever. So all of a sudden, even if you're in your 60s or 70s, for a vast majority of people, if you're told you have a terminal illness, it causes a cognitive disconnect, because you've never throughout your life rationalized and accept your own death. So people go through this process. That's why they have counseling, they have all this stuff set up, because then you have to actually come around and accept. You have to rationalize and truly accept your own mortality. When you do that, there's a different level of peace. There's a different level of freedom that somebody gains. And when you talk about violence and you talk about combat, this is one of the biggest, the earliest processes that have to happen. By the time you have two guys banging at your fucking door and you're like, oh fuck, and the stress, the anxiety, and the fear of that situation become real. If you have an individual that has truly rationalized and accepted, most people intellectually understand this, but that's very different than rationalizing and accepting this. The atrocities that human beings are capable of on this planet, in this world, in our cities, in our neighborhoods, is fucking stomach churning. The idea of what I said earlier about the scenario that if they break down that door and they isolate or eliminate you, they're going to do unspeakable, horrific acts to your family, happens to good people on a daily basis. I mean, just the atrocities that human beings can do to another human being. My favorite analogy of this is humans do things to other humans that animals would never even consider. Do you get what I mean? And as vicious and predatory as you have some animals, they're hunting off instinct, killing off necessity for the most part. Do you get what I mean? But they don't tend to, with exceptions, create these or execute these atrocities. I had a guy earlier that I was training earlier this week, and we'll get to a certain part, we're teaching a certain part, and there was this pushback. So first thing, as always, I share the problem with him. So I'm explaining the problem. Here's the problem. Here's what you're facing. Here's the threat. And so here's the solution to that threat. But his brain was like, can't I do this instead? It's like, here's what's happening, and here's the response to A. And then he would go, but why can't I do C? And I'm like, because C doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But he kept fighting to be able to do C. Why? Because it's like, you want to do C because that is connected to a false perception or expectation that you had about yourself and about how combat and violence works. But he literally would not let go of it until finally I just said, okay, then do it. I will present you with energy A, you do C. And of course, we're doing this in a safe way, but a realistic way. I did A, he tried to do C, and C failed. And C got him some biofeedback. And then he was like, well, I'd like to try it again. You can try this all day long. I love this part of it. I do A, he does C, he gets biofeedback. And then when we stopped, I literally had to go downstairs, punch up a bunch of, we got thousands of hours of CCTV footage of violence, murders, attacks, real world stuff caught on closed circuit camera from all over the world. And I had to show him 6 different videos of people in real world situations when stimulus A happened, them trying to do C, and all losing their lives in a very graphic way. And that, like, just, you could see him turn pale. I mean, the blood literally left his face. He was having a physiological response to what he's seeing. And he had to just sit there, and the rest of the training, I mean, literally, we're normally doing 1 hour private intensives. He was here for 2.5 hours. Because then it became a lecture and helping guide him through the rationalization process. And then when he left, it was like 7 hours later, he was thinking about it nonstop, and he finally hit a point of acceptance. So what he did was finally rationalized and accepted a reality of violence in the world. And at that point, what I was showing him, the strategy, what I wanted him to do, became crystal clear, and then that anchored in. Does that make sense? Like, so many people really don't understand violence because they haven't experienced it. I think one of the greatest gifts that I have as a coach is that I was also a victim of an attempted murder. Like, and was absolutely unequivocally unprepared for it, despite the fact that I'd been, black belt martial arts and had been, training sparring partner with 2 professional fighters for 5 years. I had zero, I just, I could do nothing. But that feeling of what it's like when when a group of people are willing to murder you over nothing, they tend to call that scene the elephant. That's what people get their first real brush of combat. So I think that's one of the greatest things that we offer through our organization is we never allow people to not go through the rationalization and acceptance process. It takes time. Different things take different amounts of time, but you have to get grounded in reality, and you have to learn some lessons and accept that there's just, there's a reality to this. But we've been so hyper filled with movies and martial arts and sport and everything we see. The context is so different, and context determines the content. So when you start exposing people to the context of real world violence, atrocities, the depravity of human beings, even when I say violence is about destruction, I know that rings different to you two. When people say the word violence, I've got several images of atrocities that I can't escape. And it to the point that my stomach, it instantaneously causes dread, because it's like you're dealing with death. You're just dealing with the lowest form of human beings. They do not value life. That's what you're going to have to face. So rationalization and acceptance, when you do that, you are divorcing yourself from future results because you've accepted the realities of what is. Somebody banging on your door where you're going, fuck, these guys going to try and come in this house? I've accepted that if they can, they will fucking bound me, kill me, do whatever they have to do to get at my family. And I have no fantasies about what they do to them. You get what I mean? I know the realities of what these people do. I've said this before in a podcast of, one of our clients flying up north as a medic and a kidnapping of a 15-year-old girl, cutting off her fingers and shoving them up her anus, forcing her to eat her fingers, otherwise they'd slit her throat and send her head back to her family, kind of thing. Like, this is reality happening in Canada. And people are like, are you kidding me? That's a fucking movie. And it's like, no, it's not a movie. It's fucking real. And it's worse. And people they can't rationalize that, and they can't accept that. So they don't understand the enemy that's coming. If you find yourself facing lethal force, imminent grievous bodily harm or death, there's a Delta operator named Paul Howe. And Paul Howe has a video that he shows everybody that he trains. And it is what happens when individuals submit to the mercy of an enemy. And what the enemy does to these guys is fucking horrific. But he uses that not as shock value, but to show people, listen, there will be a part of you that when shit gets overwhelming and you start having, maybe I'm not going to win this shit, or even before it, because there's a fear, what if I don't win this, where you want to negotiate. We call it benefit of the doubt yourself to death. You want to just try to avoid this and hey man, if I just give you this, you'll do this. But bad guys, as we know, the posturing predators, they want that submission, but there is no mercy. The high level shit we're talking about, there's no mercy. They will then just proceed to do and commit whatever atrocities they came there to commit in the first place. Okay, now, are there lower levels than that? Say, Greg, you're as most people would say, this guy's crazy. You're fucking extreme. Well, it's the reality of what happens. You don't fall to your level. You don't rise to your level of expectation. You fall to your level of training. So, what service would I be doing for people if I didn't educate them on the realities of what can happen? We have had clients come to us. We have had people. We know people that have experienced horrific atrocities done to them or their family members. It's not a fantasy. It's not like maybe you haven't experienced it, but there's people that have, and they're not in some foreign country. You know what I mean? So rationalization and acceptance to me allows people to divorce themselves from the result. And in that, like I said, one way or another, this is going to be done in 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. You got to be in that moment. And you just got to focus in on the mission demands and mission commands and work that process, because anything else, letting in the stress, the anxiety, the fear, failing to regulate, you will lose. If you regulate, you win. If you don't, you lose. Okay, so sorry, a little bit of a long-winded thing there, but I just felt it's so important to deep dive the rationalization and acceptance, because to me, that's the big takeaway tonight. So I don't know if you guys want to throw something downrange on that, and then otherwise we'll get ready to wrap up here.
No, I'm good, Greg.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, all right, we'll wrap it up there. So listen, thanks a lot, guys. Hey, Kieran, if you're still on, buddy, thanks for popping on, following the podcast. Appreciate you, man. Looking forward to connecting with you here in the next little bit. Things have been busy, but I'm sure we'll connect in a bit and maybe get you in on some training is what we're looking at. So, all right, for you guys, Dustin, Brad, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it as always. Your willingness to share your time, knowledge, and energy is always appreciated. To everybody else, thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like, follow, share, comment. Wherever you listen to the podcast, please feel free to, if you feel like we're worth it, leave a 5-star rating. That is how we expand this and reach more people. There's, anyways, I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to go off on a tirade on some other things that are going on with algorithms and stuff. But anyways, every voice matters, so we appreciate you. Stay safe, stay weaponized. Chat again soon, everybody. Take care.